Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, and welcome to another HRO Today educational podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today magazine. We publish HRO Today EMEA and HRO Today APAC, as well as host the HRO Today conferences held around the world, and we manage the HRO Today Association. Today's educational podcast is actually sponsored by the HRO Today Association, and we're thrilled to have one of our board members joining us today. Jeffrey Lackey is the Vice President of Talent Acquisition at CVS Health. He's been at CVS Health for more than 6 years, and before that was with notable brands as Rolls-Royce and Corning Corporation. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Glad to be here.
Jeff, we all know the complexity of day-to-day operations of a talent acquisition program. But today we're going to look at both the complexity and challenge of scale and the issue of managing change. You've just gone through this mega merger. For those of you in our audience, I'm sure you all know about CVS Health. It's one of the largest retail pharmacy service companies and healthcare provider organizations in the world. In North America, most people live within a couple of miles of one of their more than 10,000 retail locations, many of them which have now clinical care settings. The challenge of CVS on an ongoing basis is stunning. We all know this. Now, Jeff's life was already complicated when about 2 years ago, they merged with Aetna. Aetna is one of the largest health insurers in the world, and they had similar challenges of scale from a very different perspective. Today, we're going to be discussing these issues with Jeff Lackey, who is responsible for not only keeping the fires burning on all of the open jobs, which, by the way, have been ramped up substantially because of the efforts to build a vaccination force to inject the COVID-19 vaccines, but he's also simultaneously overseeing the integration of their TA infrastructure from 2 teams into 1. So we're going to focus on a couple of areas of cultural integration, operational integration, and the data insights that you or anyone in the position Jeff has been in would need to manage this process. So, Jeff, let me start off by saying I'm sure in the hour or 2 of sleep you get a night, you have to try to not ponder what the next day holds for you. We all know the complexity and challenge of running a talent acquisition business. But here we have this merger. So in the midst of the merger, there are many different priorities. When you and I spoke in advance of this recording, you mentioned to me that you really looked at cultural integration first. How did you evaluate what you and the team thought were the best aspects in both organizations? And then what did you do once you had sort of made that evaluation? Tell us how you did it, and then how you actually went about implementing it to create a single TA infrastructural culture. How did you do it?
Well, thank you. Appreciate the intro, Elliot. And it has been an exciting time. It's a funny thing because somebody had mentioned about 2019 being such a remarkable year. And I said, what the heck did we actually do in 2019? I can't remember anything but 2020 right now. That's like my entire memory has been erased, right? But it was actually 2019 was an enormous year for us to integrate our 2 companies into 2020 and beyond. And when we talked about culture, some folks were looking at it from a talent perspective and from an overall culture perspective, and they looked at our purpose and our values, and they actually lined up very well from the outset. Aetna and CVS have been long-term partners, client-customer relationships, complex integrated relationships for a decade. That meant we knew each other quite well. And when we decided to come together as one company, that meant that it wasn't like we were coming together as strangers. We were coming together as very familiar with each other and very comfortable working together already. That said, those elements of culture were set in motion that were our purpose and our values very much aligned. But it really started when Kathleen Joffrey and I were in the meeting for the first time when we were bringing our 2 companies together. Now, I'd been on a panel with Kathleen. She and I knew each other. We were friendly. And we saw each other, and she was so excited. She saw me. And the first thing I said to her, right out of the gate, I said, listen, Kathleen, I really don't care who gets the top job on this because I know that you might get it, I might get it, both might get a place out of this at the end, and that would be great. I'd love that. But honestly, all I care about right now is just doing right by the organization and setting something up for greatness. And she just looked at me with the biggest relief in her face, and she just sighed. She goes, I was wondering how we were going to talk about that. I am so glad that you said that, and I feel like we could do that. And she lived up to that. 100% the whole way through. We collaborated, we partnered, and there was no tension in the room whatsoever about anything. We didn't always agree on everything. Sometimes we thought different, but we worked it out, we talked it out, and we decided, okay, so this makes sense for the best way forward for the organization. But I'd say about 95% of the time, we did agree on most things, and we had consensus. There were technology blends, there were technology alignments that didn't fit. There were all sorts of things. But in terms of culture, what we did was we agreed a few things based off the guiding principles, based on our current values and our current perspective. And what we said was, we're going to let this organization come together on the purpose of helping our leaders hire great people. And we're going to bring this combined organization together under that premise. And it worked phenomenally. It was not easy. It left us with lots of sleepless nights. Whenever they did do the announcement that I was going to do the head of TA and she's going to do the head of talent management, that left me with essentially 18 direct reports that I had to find a way to harmonize into 9 direct reports. But then in most cases, a lot of those individuals ended up folding into the broader organization. My objective was clear: put the best people in the position and try to achieve a balance of voices of both Aetna and CVS on my leadership team, so that at the end of the day, so that we felt as though we would have a very balanced and very respected culture that allowed us to be successful in the long term. And we achieved many of the things. By the time that COVID hit, we had already integrated our processes. We even integrated our careers website, our CRM. All these other things had already been put in place and integrated. The only thing that wasn't was the ATS, because that was connected then into our PeopleSoft system. And we, as a company, had chosen at that point not yet to integrate our human capital management systems. And so we had to wait until 1/1/21 to integrate those. And now it is completely integrated, and there's no difference between the systems. And that was painful. Having 2 systems, working on 2 systems, and then blending teams so that many of them had to work across both systems because of the way that we set it up. But it was super important that their voices were at the table. People felt respected, they felt heard, and they felt like they were part of building the strategy of something that was going to be bigger than they were, bigger than all of us. And it proved true because we were ready when COVID hit. Man, we were ready. We couldn't have done it if we would have been in a state of disintegration. We were in a state of full integration with everything but our ATSs. We slammed down on the accelerator like nobody could believe, and all of us just went go. It was a unifying event, quite frankly. COVID was a place where everybody left their identification of CVS Aetna behind, and they said, we're all one. Because we're saying now 2021 is the year of one. I'm like, 2020 was the year of one. Now we just got to make it into something that keeps on going. So that's really how the culture was formed and how we are continuing to evolve our organization.
Yeah, I want to explore the operational model in just a minute, but because you touched on some of it already in that question. It is interesting. Most times when people talk about cultural integration, they start off with this very deep analysis of the differences. It sounds like you actually went in the opposite direction, did a very deep analysis of where there was confluence and where there was agreement, and then resolved the differences as sort of the second phase, which is unusual. A lot of change management, they start off focusing on what is incompatible. But clearly in healthcare, the health and well-being of the patient comes first, right? From that standpoint, was that sort of approach something that you and the other executives in the HR group had decided initially, or was it just sort of organic in the course of your conversations? That's where you focused?
It's a little bit of both. So I'll say that from a CVS Health, we did find that there were a lot more commonalities and differences, and we wanted to start by focusing on those things that are common. But I also give credit to Mark Judd, who I worked with. He works over at Workday now, but he and I worked for years together, over 8 years at Rolls-Royce. And as we were starting up different shared services across the globe, one of those analogies was see the connections, not just the differences. Don't just focus in on what separates you, but see those things that are maybe as connection points and opportunities. And that really influenced me tremendously. So I took that same approach here, and I really wanted to focus the minds on the ways that we were similar, because the ways that we were different was going to be obvious and probably painful along the way. There's no way of getting around it. But if you already have a common base to start with, then those differences become a lot more tolerable and easy to eat and more palatable, and you're willing to work through them. So that was the starting point. In terms of the operating model for TA, what we did was actually pretty simple. We call it the candy cane model. And if you think about it, as complexity and challenge rise, so does cost and investment. And so executive search is always going to be your most expensive, and that's going to be the most handheld and it's going to be the most tailored. That's your perfect bespoke suit. Your executive and niche search kind of fall together in that category, pretty close to the niche search for those data analytics and data scientist people. Maybe you're in higher volume, digital people, rarefied individuals. Those people will, again, fall in that quadrant. And then you have what I call the management and the individual contributor in replacement type positions, higher level professional, and that's for the internal team primarily. They handle that, and that's what I refer to as service delivery. And then everything that kind of goes from the individual contributor on down and some of the lower level management would be the RPO teams would handle that. So the recruitment process outsourcing. So 7-Step, Allegis, AGS, and PeopleScout are some of our partners there. And then below that is the team that essentially runs all of our hires, our DC hires, our highest of high volume, which is an internal team, and that's the HCS. And that's an internal team within the shared services that has hiring agents literally will pack in several hundreds to thousands of hires a month individually. So it's a tremendous machine that helps us to run a large portion of our business. In addition, we also had a cut at the model that said we need to specialize in certain areas other than just executive search and niche. So our bread and butter is pharmacy in one area, so pharmacists, pharmacy techs. So there's an entire team that's dedicated to pipelining and building out enterprise pharmacy talent and working on the enterprise pharmacy athlete and figuring out how to not only recruit into those areas, but also how to get people experiences across the different silos of our business and get more exposure. And similarly, there's a parallel with the enterprise clinical business, which again works across multiple lines of business and is all things clinical except pharmacists. So all your nurses, your docs, your RNs, your NPs, your nutritionists, optometrists, et cetera, would fall into this category. Your Minute Clinic would be a big user, your Quorum, your healthcare accordance, and all of those would be big lines of business that would leverage clinical staff. So in all, then obviously we have what you'd expect. Your college recruiting is a big focus. Our diversity recruiting, we have a team dedicated to developing and enhancing our diversity channels, awareness, and continuous improvement in diversity hiring. And then we also have a dedicated marketing team for marketing, advertising, a project management organization that helps with continual. I have over 38 different pieces of technology. So they help with deploying technology as well as instituting new processes and capabilities and systems. And then obviously we also own the relocation team as well as the contingent worker program for the organization. So those are run out of my shop. And then you have your TA ops stuff like budget processes, standard operating procedures, and all the rest. So all in all, it's a pretty complex organization comprising a little over 200 people, full-time plus contractors, plus the staff that runs all the retail and of all 3 of our RPOs. So it's a tremendous operation that does some really good work that makes me proud every day.
And it sounds like it's very well rationalized, right? That you've got it you figured out where you could cross over several different areas of both the legacy CVS Health and the legacy Aetna businesses to create functional teams rather than divisional teams. Certainly a much more cost-effective way to do it with centers of excellence and whatnot.
We did keep a portion of it for a time and still have it that is focused on just the healthcare business because there are some uniquenesses, especially as we had 2 different systems. That was something that we kept for a time, but we have slowly been integrating that in just so that we could make sure that the processes and systems and all the technology didn't overwhelm the new, especially as we move into new systems, didn't overwhelm the business.
Speaking of systems, let's move on to the third part of this because you know, in the past 2 years, you've had to make hundreds of decisions about we go with this versus that, navigate some of the turf issues between vendors. You had to navigate turf issues between managers. You had to look at categories of job families that were common to CVS Health and common to Aetna. And then there were probably some I'm sure you guys didn't have a lot of actuaries on staff at CVS, but I'm sure Aetna did, as an example. But if you think about the way you made decisions, and specifically so much of what we talk about now in HR is about data science and data insights, where were you getting and bear in mind, as I asked the question, if we talk about specific products, I know CVS policies that you can't make product endorsements, but I'm going to ask you, what were the tools that you felt you had to use and rely on to help you make informed decisions and give some sense of how you used them to get from where you were in 2019 when they said, oh, by the way, you got to merge these 2 giant companies, and then, 2020, well, we're we're going to have a pandemic. I mean, you've had a lot to do in the last 2 years. Where were you getting information that helped you make informed decisions?
It's a funny thing because Kathleen and I, that was one of our first discussions. She said to me, she goes, how'd you get so many toys? Right? because some of the things that she had wanted to get, I had. Some of the stuff was kind of easy because I had things that she was looking to bring on board, in the near future or had on the roadmap of things that she was going to be asking for. And I'd already found a way to get access to and get integrated into our systems. So in the cases where you have technology where there's a zero delt, they got nothing on their side, we got something, that was easy. Then there was cases of, great example, Connexa ATS was in both organizations. So which version of Connexa are we going to go with? Well, we had a good debate about it, but the answer was made for us because we were going to move into CVS's PeopleSoft. That decision was made, and it just didn't make any rational sense to keep an instance of Connexa that didn't already have an automation and feed into PeopleSoft. And there's a huge portion of Connexa which does all the retail hiring and has tons and tons of robotic process automation and other technology embedded in it, which would have been exceptionally difficult to untangle and then reallocate to a new system. So that was made fairly easy.
Connexa brass.
The brass ring, right. Connexa, okay. Correct. Okay. Yeah. But then you have things like SmashFly versus Avature. Hey, Avature is a great CRM. SmashFly is a great CRM. There's other great CRMs. Why did we go with SmashFly? Because of the integrated decision. Because SmashFly also owned the website. It was more of an integrated tool for us than Avature. And we had just separated our relationship with TMP, and they still had an ongoing relationship with TMP, which we didn't intend to continue on. Some strategic reasons. We wanted to be able to build out our own capability in our web design and population. And so that was easy. So actually, many of the decisions weren't all that difficult. They almost made themselves. Where they were more difficult, such as relocation companies, right? That was a little challenging. We just let everybody have a voice at the table, and we said, hey, we got to make a business decision, and there's going to be some people that like it and some that don't. We just ask that you go with the process, and we're going to make it as rational and as objective as we possibly can, and we're going to make a choice. And we hope everybody can be on board with it. And to our benefit, to a person, everybody was on board with it. They said their piece, they argued, debated, did whatever they could to persuade one way or the other, and realized that there was a choice that had to be made, and it went one way or the other each time, and we weren't playing favorites. We were calling balls and strikes on it. We weren't trying to coach it one way or another. And that was important to me because I wanted people to feel like their voice mattered. If you're trying to weigh it toward one thing or another just because you have a personal favor, you're more comfortable with it. It takes away people's voice, and that's super important part of the culture to make people feel like they have a say in what the future has to offer. And that was core to how I wanted to lead the team.
Well, it sounds like you had an embarrassment of riches in terms of having all, like you mentioned some of the brands, whether it's Brass Ring and PeopleSoft and Avature and SmashFly, and that these are really very high quality choices that you were making between that some were highly established in both firms, but hardly, you weren't dealing with a lot of startup technology, it sounds like.
We had some startup tech, but those were startup tech that we had the startup and, in CVS, and the Aetna organization did not have those. Like, we have ongoing relationship with Paradox. We've been working with them for about 4 or 5 years now, since they were, as my dad used to say, knee high to a grasshopper, right? Now they're a big player out there, but, they're part of our portfolio and continue to be. But they didn't have a chatbot or any other type of technology to interact with the candidate. So there was that. But also, as you talk about the data, you have organizations that were helping us, especially our RPO organizations. One of the reasons why we picked Allegis was because of some of their data insights and technology, and that's been good. One of the reasons that we continue to work with a 7-step beyond just their ability to provide great people has been the fact that they have some strong technology. Surveyor is one of the platforms that we've been using to help aggregate our data and be able to look at it and be able to give everybody a quick access view from a talent acquisition organization of what the picture of everything that's going on, which is actually quite complex, as you might imagine, and fluid. Literally, we have org changes announced every day across multiple systems. Now we have one, but back then across multiple systems that threw everything up in the air. And there were just people hammering out, how do you reconcile all these changes and spit out reporting that actually made sense, that was actionable. And we had things that were true predictive analytics for some of our hiring that helped us anticipate all sorts of things so that we wouldn't find ourselves in a ditch. We would know that we were driving right toward the ditch 30, 60, 90 days before it ever happened. So it was the technology, the data, the analytics, the insights brought from a team of people who were willing to share, talented individuals. And the most important part was these folks care deeply. And whenever the pandemic hit, they didn't bat an eye. I know Carrie and her team worked like 48 hours straight to build the first set of websites for our partner companies. They just went to town. I couldn't have asked her to stop if I wanted to. She had told me, if you ask me to stop, I'm probably going to quit. So don't even think about it, right? That's how much they wanted to do the work. I can't tell you how grateful I am to have a team that's so dedicated and so hardworking and so amazingly accountable. It makes my job as a leader like way easier. I don't get 1 hour. I get a whole 4 to 6 hours every night of sleep.
And now I've seen the published reports to support the national vaccination effort here in North America. Estimates as high as 50,000 employees to help with that program. So I wouldn't just be working from home if I were you, Jeff. I'd be hiding in the basement. So.
We are absolutely grateful. And it's a funny thing. We've actually found ourselves ahead on some of the recruiting at times because, vaccination, they think they're going to have it and then it gets delayed. And then we find out that, we have to reposition folks. So none of this is one size fits all. I find myself in not just a daily, but hourly problem solving mode. Actually, this podcast here is like my mental break for the day. I don't have to solve any problems, work with teams to figure out how to get nearly impossible thing done, figure out what's going to happen next so we can anticipate and get ahead of it. It's, really a nice relief. But that's what we do all day is just solve problems. And they're almost all unique, interesting, and it makes my day go by fast.
Well, that's awesome. So for the listeners out there, a good bit of my career early on as an executive search consultant was spent in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry. And I think 2020 and 2021 have really sort of underscored the important and often overlooked role that these companies play in our society. These organizations are filled with dedicated professionals and play such an important and vital role in society, and we're seeing it play out in this pandemic in an effort to save lives. And your team, Jeff, is doing a lot to make that happen. I thought you had a couple of interesting insights. One, was on the integration, focus on what unites you, not what divides you. I loved your description of the candy cane model of complexity, but really rationalizing the functional TA departments and processes so that you're not really looking at divisions, but across job families, across functions, and creating synergy. That's great. And then on the decision making, you've got more than a dozen different primary platforms where you're pulling data out of and being able to really extract and focus on what's important. Where can I get insight across the entire enterprise, whether it's through reporting out of the ATS system, whether it's from CRM systems, and you have, insight tools like those provided. I think Legis is the QuantumWorks platform. 7-Step is Surveyo. So for folks out there who are TA leaders, don't overlook that your service partners often have access to some very sophisticated technology that you should think about how you incorporate and make part of your day-to-day. Jeff, I really appreciate the opportunity to give you a mental break today. This has been great for our listeners. Thank you for your time and the great insights that you've given. And, once again, this is sponsored by the HRO Today Association, which is an industry association comprised of both provider and practitioner organizations. We have a lot of corporate members. And, Jeff, I want to also thank you for taking part in that association and being one of our board members. So thanks again. And for all of you out there in Radio Land, we look forward to having you join us on our next HRO Today educational podcast.